This oral history of museum computing is provided by Max Evjen and was recorded on the 15th of March 2021 by Paul Marty and Kathy Jones. Story.
Sure. Okay, I mean, I came from museums. Well, I previously described it as from a like non-traditional background, but then I find all these people who do this kind of work who are from the exact same background. So it's like, oh, okay, well that makes sense. Because I for years was working in theater, and I was a theater producer, and I did tech stuff, and I was an actor, and all that. Pretty much everything. The only thing I didn't really do was costumes, um, but everything else. And um, over the course of the work that I was doing, I started a production company that we facilitated collaboration among scientists and artists to create performances. And then we were doing all of these different projects with museum professionals and with other museums. And I just got really interested in that world. And um, I ended up getting my master's degree from Johns Hopkins, and in their museum studies program. And the thing about that program is that it's all digital mediated, right? Of course, but also the like the foundation book in that was like museums in the digital future, right? So it like the whole of that degree is very digital focused, and I also at the same time was working at Cornell University for their interaction design lab and on mobile device application projects. So I was just getting more involved in technology broadly, and so one project that was with the museum as well, and um, and then I ended up after the degree, I got a job at the Shedd Aquarium as director of learning programs, so that I wasn't really like getting like on the front lines of digital stuff, except that we had a team that was a digital learning team that I was working with on projects. So I was sort of directing them through what they were doing. Then my wife and I moved to to Arizona because my wife ended up getting a postdoc at ASU, and I was doing a more exhibition design work and evaluation work because I also have some experience in evaluation, and so I did a project that was decidedly not um, digital because they already had a digital thing in the exhibit, so they wanted me to create non-digital analog stations, and then they asked to use um, the people who I was working for at ASU who hired me to work with the Phoenix Art Museum on this one project wanted to maybe use the things that I was doing later, and I said you can use them, but then you have to evaluate them to see if they work because I don't know, like I'm creating a thing, and and then I looked at it and said, well, you can't really evaluate those without the context of the entire exhibition, and so they hired me to evaluate the entire exhibition. Which did that, and then we moved. My wife ended up getting a tenure track position at MSU, where we are now, and I ended up getting hired by the university as well. And I was working. I got hired. Part of my appointment. I mean, this still sort of exists, but it's a little bit changed. By the time I came in, I was working 51% for the Department of Theater, but teaching for the Arts, Cultural Management, and Museum Studies program. At the time, it was Arts and Cultural Management program, but then it got together. Right, a lot of changes happened in the university since I got here. Um, and so I was doing that, and then I also got was working for the MSU Museum, which is a science and culture museum on campus, and my original title was Exhibitions Technology Specialist, which really didn't quite encapsulate exactly what I did because I did a lot of work in terms of yes, exhibitions technology, but also digital strategy, social media, um, marketing stuff, program stuff, like it was pretty broad. And so um, that was a really interesting experience because I came into that job really focused on the visitor side, or the user side of technology stuff. I wasn't. I mean, they have an IT person who deals with all the back end stuff and deals with the servers and making sure your email works and make sure that the printers work and all the infrastructure works, right? But they didn't necessarily have somebody thinking critically about the sort of UX and humanistic ways of thinking about technology, right? And when I ended up getting in that role, somebody at the museum actually asked me a question that kind of took me aback. But at one point, that in one way it was like, well, that's pretty offensive, and another way it's like, well, that's actually pretty instructive, which was like, okay, how they didn't understand. They're like, how does your job differ from IT? And I was like, okay, and I had to like, okay, well, how is it different, right? Okay, and so I went over those areas that I was telling you about of like, okay, digital strategy, exhibition technology, the things where people, social media, the things where people how when people intersect with the museum and through digital means, how are we doing that, right? Through experiences in programs or experiences in exhibitions, through social media and website, etc. And so but then once I could answer that question this person asked me, I was working at first. I was working like my role was on the exhibitions team because they thought, okay, I'm doing exhibitions technology. But then as we progressed, and the museum ended up getting a new director, I ended up getting moved over to the education team. Still doing the same work, but they were just like, well, this really belongs here. Right. And although at that point, those two teams have been working together anyway, because I recommended that they should have meetings together. Because you really can't do one without the other. And they're like, oh, that sounds good. So because they were working, like I would just be working with them all anyway. And so I was working mostly on, like I said, I was working a lot on exhibitions technology, so doing a lot of soundscapes for exhibitions, doing some video work, as far as like getting videos, putting them on touch screens and stuff like that, and then shepherding a project to bring a touchscreen application into one of the exhibitions, into like a reboot of one of the long-term exhibitions. And one of the things that early on when I was there, when I was going through all the exhibits with the person who's the director of education there, and we were just looking at all the exhibitions and thinking about like what kind of things we could do to maybe update what is in all the long term exhibitions without like ripping them out. Short of that, because I mean, clearly there were a lot of designs that people wanted to do exactly just that, but in places where we thought we didn't need to do that, like what could we do digitally for for those experiences? And one of the things that came to my mind pretty quickly was, well, AR, right? Any mixed reality stuff could be advantageous. So that was like one of the first things that I thought about, and then we sort of were talking about it for a couple years until we got to a point where we realized we had some money set aside for that for technology in the museum that they thought the IT person was thinking, if I could have these videos that were in front of or video screens in front of every exhibition that we could centrally command and then push information to, right? That's what he wanted. And I made the recommendation along with other people who were in this meeting that instead of doing that we do things that are more interactive for visitors rather than just like a push of information. And we basically got the green light to go ahead and start to test some AR in the museum. And so we we found that we could work with. There was a student that he said he had experience working with museums using augmented reality, and he did have a little bit of experience, but not much. Um, and so and that like that's really the like when I was working with the interaction design lab at Cornell, this is what I was doing, was working with the programmers. Like I'm not a programmer, but I can manage a team of programmers to get a project done. And so that's what I was doing with this person. Was just developing a sort of proof of concept, minimum viable product, whatever you want to talk about, of a really pretty basic augmented reality thing on one mural an exhibition that a lot of people in the museum anecdotally say, well, nobody stops there. So that's a good place to start, right? And so we did that, and we did some user tests of the software, and also wanted to know a couple different things related to like if people were learning anything from that. So we developed an evaluation plan that you go into those things thinking, okay, well we're only using two methodologies, two tools, right? Well, like, we had a survey and we had some videos taken of people using the devices. Yeah, I mean, you get an N of 66 people giving the survey and 87 doing the video, and like that just takes forever. But the fortunate thing is I actually had a lot of students who actually volunteered to work with me in the data collection and analysis of the project. So I had about 6 people who just decided, and I was, that they really wanted to do something like this. And I mean, on one hand, that's free labor, and I was making it very clear to these people that that I can't pay them, but I wish I could. But I had been talking to another person in the museum community who's talking about how there's been research on AR, but there hasn't really been anything related to learning, or at least not a lot out there in the research about what AR can do, and that if they're doing that, they're kind of getting in on the ground floor of doing that kind of research if they wanted to. But again, it was up to them and their time commitment. But I mean, I wouldn't have gotten the project done without them. It's just not. It wouldn't be possible. So when I presented about it at Museums of the Web, I made darn sure that I credited these people, like who were doing this project, because like there's just no way. There's no way I would have gotten done. But we did what we found from doing that that test was that more than like about 66% of the people who indicated they learned something from the experience said that they oh, thanks, Paul. Said that they learned something about animal adaptation or behavior in some particular way. They referenced those concepts, and those were the central concepts of the space of the whole gallery. And in my experience, like certainly when I was doing the evaluation of the thing at the Phoenix Art Museum, which had the central goals kind of plastered all over the exhibition, like very few people say anything about the central goals of the exhibition or the gallery, right? So for like 66% of the people who said something about that, said something related to those concepts, that is, I mean, we need more study, right? But like that, there's a good place to start, right? And that's, I think I still have my I pinned a tweet on my Twitter sharing the whole report with everybody, because what I presented at MuseWeb was everything wasn't complete by that point. So it's missing some of the data, but I shared the whole project with everybody. But I did share that sort of after the fact that I didn't because like shortly thereafter that I presented that that the results of that to the director of education, the director of exhibits, and a few other people. Although the museum director wasn't there, but I did give him access to the document. um, uh, they, they couldn't shore up my contract because there was a weird thing with the university where like I was a spousal hire, so I was funded for 3 years, and then after that, your funding just dries up, and then you have to figure out something new. And the museum's underwater and to the hundreds of thousands anyway on staff time, so they couldn't figure out a way to keep me there, and I ended up moving that part of my appointment into digital humanities, which is also in the College of Arts and Letters, which is the same college that houses the Department of Theater. So that kind of that helps to kind of solidify my appointment here. And that was acceptable to me because there's still a lot of digital humanities work that happens in museums anyway, and there's a lot that and I still teach in the museum studies program. But yeah, that was sort of the sum total of my experience at the museum. I mean, I will say, going back to one of the earlier things that I did there, where I was saying that we got a touch screen application for one of the exhibitions. Well, this is a thing where they had to they wanted this one program that was that the team who was developing the plans for it thought that the program was going to be free because it was part of an NSF grant. But the duration of the grant had been exceeded, and the people who developed it then took the thing and added more stuff to it, and so now they're charging for it. So they're like, okay, well, if we want to pay for this, well, then we can't like also get the IDEUM table, right? That's the all-in-one thing for 8 to 10 grand or whatever. So I figured out for them like, okay, well, we can't do that, but I think I found a place that manufactures touchscreen capabilities that you can just put on a standard TV. And so we ended up just hooking up a computer. It was much cheaper to just buy a new computer, have that one program dedicated on it, and have it feed into a TV screen that had touchscreen capability on it. By like many thousands of dollars from what they were gonna do. So, it's like, I don't know. I was a little bitter about like having to move from that when like I helped them do that, or I like made this project for about AR that like a museum of that particular like situation hasn't done anything like that before, right? But I needed to have a job, so so I ended up moving the my appointment. Yeah, but that's well, and then like next semester, in place of the I'm teaching a learning in museums class right now, but in place of this class, I'm going to be teaching a digital future of museums class. So I'm still very I still frequent MCN and MuseWeb, and still in that world of museum technology a lot. And I mean, even the discussions that we're having right now in my Learning in Museums course have been very digitally centered. I mean, just the current moment kind of drives that, right? About talking about virtual programs and engaging people through social media. I mean, I have actually this coming week we're going to be talking about digital learning, but we've already had a lot of the conversations that I would already ascribe to what we'd have this week in the digital learning week of the class, just because that's what's happening now, right?
I can post in the chat. I'll post my this is my reading list for my graduate class on museum informatics. So feel free to grab anything off of that.
Thank you very much.
Might be useful there. I
Yeah.
want to go back to the AR mural, if you don't mind. What was the
Sure.
reception of that? I mean, it was just a prototype, right? I'm assuming it's still not there.
The application. Yeah,
I mean, I know
they
the mural's
have.
still there, but
Yeah, we the money that we had for that project, we ended up buying some tablets to use for that, and I know they still have the tablets. I know they were trying to do something else with them, like put put Zoom on them or something. They emailed me later, like, "Are we able to do that with these?" And I was like, I'm pretty sure, just do this." So we had the budget for that, to get those things, and we also got some other exhibition technology, like what's it called? One of those things that like direct sound down from a sound dome, for a couple different projects that they thought they were going to have, and that we did use later. But yeah, so I mean, I'm sure that app is still on the devices. I would doubt that they would like chuck the app, but I don't know.
Well, the reason I'm wondering, right, is that your stories, you touch upon a lot of really important themes, right? This whole idea that, wait, well, are you telling me that IT is more than just plugging computers in, right? This
Uh-huh.
this
Yeah.
understanding that technology can be used to tell a story, to present content, right?
Yep. Yeah.
The sort of
Mm-hmm.
prototyping work that you're doing, we've heard this from person after person, right? That it's hard for a lot of people to make that jump. So I'd be curious
Yeah.
to hear more about those experiences, like the sound dome you mentioned, right? What's
Yeah.
how did that come about?
That was something that the director of exhibitions was interested in. She had seen it used in a few places, and I mean, I would think that, since I was doing so much kind of soundscape stuff for exhibitions, that I think for her that was a logical next step of like, let's have that so we can do things where it's more focused sound. And so when, as part of that pot of money where we bought the tablets, we also bought the sound dome, and then we used it in I used it in one exhibition before I was out of the museum. That was an exhibition on the nature of work in Abomey, based on somebody's research. We just have been talking about how people are working in that city, and in Benin, and yeah, and so we just had like audio of this person, like a barker, like announcing jobs and stuff on the back of his bike, and so she had a picture of him, but then she also had audio of him actually giving his shtick or his spiel or whatever, right? So when you got close to that, then it would trigger it, and you would hear him. Um, so yeah, that was we're using that. But then yeah, I mean your thoughts, like it's not, there's certainly the experience that I had at the museum, like, is in terms of that first person asking me, like, well, how is your job different, um, and even when uh, I was working with the new director who was there for a while, although he recently had to leave, um, or was asked to resign, for a number of reasons. But I was brainstorming with him a few different things of like how digital can be used for conversations over social media, and I was showing him like Sue the T Rex on Twitter, and then a couple of other examples of museum mascots, and he's like, "Oh, we have this exhibition about birds right now." I was like, "Yeah, but that's a temporary exhibition. You don't really want to like create something that's just for that one exhibition. It's going to come down." And he had just recently written something about the brown bear that we have in that same exhibition space where the mural is. And I said, we could do one that's the bear. And he's like, "Oh my God, go do it!" Right? And he's like, "But talk to Stephanie, the marketing and communications coordinator." And so I emailed her, and I'm like, "I'm sorry, I will do this with you." Like, but we're doing this, and we decided actually that it would be a really good idea, because she had interns working on different projects for marketing, to have somebody dedicated to doing that, to learning about what it means to do to actually manage social media for one of these types of organizations. And so we designed this program around that, where people who were interning in marketing in the museum would be the bear. Yeah, that account's out there. I think it's not really active right now because of COVID. I don't think they have anything happening with it. Like it actually said that it's in hibernation. But that was another thing that I brought to the different to both MuseWeb and MCN. Um, and the great thing about that is like I was bringing the people who were managing the account, so bringing students to these conferences to represent like what work is happening there, because I wasn't managing the account; they were. I was just supervising these students who were doing that work, right? So they like their voice needed to be there anyway. Um, but that's just something that I look forward to doing is getting people involved in these organizations, and because this is where most of the critical thinking around this type of work happens, right?
I'm also interested. You were talking earlier about at MSU when you started there, they weren't sure whether to put you in education or exhibitions, right?
Yeah.
And when you were talking about at the shed, you were talking about how digital learning was under the learning division that you were in charge of, right?
Yep.
It seems
Hmm.
like it's a perennial problem of where do these things belong?
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of those things. I mean, not least of which is social media, right? Because if you look in different organizations, it's all over the place. It's in marketing, or it's in PR, or it's with both, or it's with, it's in digital. Oh, a curator does it. Like, it, it, it's all over the place. When we were I did a presentation at MCN about museum mascots, and we had the bear for that, and a couple of other mascots, and we decided other people wanted to know information about it, and so we did an online survey for people to who manage those types of accounts to take, and then we could present the results for that talk. And yeah, one of our questions was, who's responsible for this mascot account, right? And yeah, all over the place, right? Just because it doesn't, on one hand, it's marketing if you're paying for it, right, to promote posts. On the other hand, it's PR if somebody's retweeting your stuff. Like, so where does that sit? It's really about those strategic decisions about like, where people think it belongs, or what the nature of that work looks like. I don't know.
No, that's great. Can you think of any examples about how those strategic decisions play out, or maybe was what about back at the shed, right? What were
Sure.
some of the digital learning projects maybe you worked on there?
Yeah, well, the way the team was working, they weren't necessarily doing like discrete digital projects. It's more like they were working with the rest of the programs team to figure out how they were doing things digitally. But that being said, one of the projects that I was responsible for was they had just right before I got there, they had just changed their outreach program from being a thing where you take the animals into the schools to a thing where classes come in through like it's not Zoom. It's I can't remember what the platform is, but they go behind the scenes of the aquarium. So like even if you go on a school trip, you won't see what these classes see. So it's still still a revenue generating experience like doing the in class thing. But the people in class do an exercise while talking that's related to what they're seeing, either in the animal hospital or in the shark habitat or in the penguins habitat. And they still do those, I know, because I show that to students sometimes about like that's how if you're thinking about changing those things, like and how far you can reach people through those types of experiences. But like I said, that decision had already been made to do that. But I had to sort of inherit the okay. Now that we changed the program, did anybody bother to tell the teachers that we've been working with about this change in programs for a while? And that didn't happen. So we had to have a communication plan for telling the teachers this is what we're doing now, because we still have them calling in for the outreach situation. Like, yeah, we don't do that anymore. But yeah, so that was more my responsibility. Is when I was there was just like making sure all those um, bells and whistles happened, right? To make sure all those projects happened. But the yeah, and as I gather from the people who were on that digital learning team, that continued to be a thing up until recently, because I know one person who was on that team got uh, uh, promoted to be like an assistant director of the whole program, which makes sense because I thought she had a lot of potential for that anyway. Uh, and the other person was like managing all the digital learning projects, but then recently got laid off. So I don't know what's happening there now in terms of that. Um,
Yeah, now we're back to the layoffs, which is its own problem. I just love the
yeah,
way you put that, that anyone bothered to tell the teachers. I mean, it gets at that problem of UX being baked into these projects.
yeah. hmm Yeah, I mean, and time and again, you hear it at different conferences about like, okay, yeah, you can make the app, that's fine, but you got to tell people you made it, right? Like you have to announce the thing, right? And when we were doing the AR project, like that was a test, so we weren't really like putting that on the website or anything. But for certain experiences, would or certain events, we would make sure to have people there so that people could use it, and then we tell them about it. But the goal for that wasn't to like make a thing for visitors; it was to see if this is going to work, right? Um, and that's the thing. I was hoping to get more into that kind of work while I was there, but then I was no I'm no longer in the museum. But that was the sort of kickoff to like, okay, now we can really do this. And then I'm gone. So
Right? Was it? Do you think it was fairly? Do you think they were used to that kind of prototyping work, or had they done that before?
they had done some front end evaluation on one of the longer term when we were doing that rebrand where we brought that application for that one thing, that was part of this revamp of a long term exhibition. And when they were doing that revamp, they did some front end evaluation for that. But that was like they look at that as like, oh my gosh, that's the one time we got to do it, right? And I was working with the director of education there, and we were having more conversations and starting to formalize a sort of program around like encouraging a culture of evaluation. And again, that didn't get very far, just because I'm out of the museum. And the thing is, like, she and I were the only two people in the museum who had experience of managing evaluation projects. So and then if she's and she's the director of education, so she has all these other things that she's doing. So I was like, when I was there, I was the one doing most of the evaluation work. So but and yeah, and that's the thing, it's like we do so much in museums, but we don't like unless we always have our best foot forward in terms of what we want to try to do, but like you don't really know if something's going to work unless you test it on somebody else. There's an axiom in user testing of you're not your users, right? Um, so yeah, it doesn't matter if you like it. It doesn't matter if you think it's great. Does everybody else?
I'm wondering how much of that culture may be a small museum versus large museum situation, whether it's, people don't have the staff, but again, you were at the shed, they have the staff for that.
Oh yeah, there was there's a guest experience team at the shed, that our guest engagement. I can't remember what it was, but they were doing all the floor evaluation. And then part of what attracted me to that job actually was in the learning group. There were three departments, and I was the director of learning programs, so I managed all the people who were doing all the programs. But we had guest engagement was in that one, and that was that was the people who were training the floor interpreters. So it was training volunteers who were doing floor interpretation, and that was like 60 people a year doing that. And then the other department of the group was learning planning and evaluation, and that organization within the group was designing evaluation tools to be used on every single program. So every time we ran a program, we had evaluation, we had data coming from every single program. Um, and that they put money into like 5 or 6 people to do that kind of work um, was really attractive to me, right? But again, yeah, that's the thing. It's like an organization like that can necessarily say, okay, we're going to open this up and put this kind of money into this, which still is not a lot. I know that the budget for that entire group was about $1.1 million, and that's like 36 staff. Yeah, I don't know how they computed all of that because that adds up really quick, right? But I mean, everybody there was fairly underpaid for the work they're doing. Um, as far as we know, as we knew the of all the big organizations there, the Shed has the highest ticket price and pays the least of everybody there
No,
for the
it's
staff.
interesting. I'm still thinking about the shed, right? What was your favorite project that you worked on while you were there?
My favorite project. We were we were starting. We ended up getting an IMLS grant to reimagine the school field trip experience, and I was like shepherding that project as we were sort of like from the real like get go of like, because we were at a point where we had the grant in and we didn't know if we had it yet, and even if we didn't have it, we were going to do something. But if we had it, then we could do what we really wanted to do. And then we ended up getting the grant for it. And out of that project, we ended up developing. Although I left before it really took off, but I knew what was going to happen was they were designing an ethogram application for students to come in for the field trip. That where they would go in and do ethograms of the animals, like behavioral observations of the animals, and then they would put this data into this thing that then can be sent back to the class where they can all compare the data that they talked about, but that also that data goes to us so that we know so that we can get data about what the animals are doing to get back to the organization. But yeah, so I mean that was really interesting because we had to we got it was one of those cross departmental things. We had to talk to everybody, people in registration for all the school field trip stuff, people in exhibitions, like everybody, and that was something that they were trying to do in that organization. A lot was cross departmental collaboration stuff because it had been pretty siloed up until that point. But it was kind of up to us to actually do it because we didn't get a lot of direction from the leadership about like it was go do, please and thank you, but it wasn't really like this is how you do it and this is what we're thinking we should do, with the exception of maybe like they had they set up a bunch of meetings for all the leadership of the departments to kind of give up little updates on what you're doing, except that like when you have that many departments, like you can only say one or two things when you've got about 20 irons in the fire, right? So it was really a snapshot of what everybody was doing. It wasn't really like a big thing. In fact, they had a different thing where they would call Shed 101, where like somebody from a department would come and give a presentation on what that department does, and those were super interesting. I went on one that was about facilities, and just seeing what you have to do when you're in a building with like 5 million gallons of water in it. um, and then to go down and actually see where all the filters are, that are these large scale filters that they have for these habitats where they have cetaceans, right? So like big massive things that you're like, where does that but it's way down in a sub basement somewhere, right? So and I know that like uh, the person who was my boss at the time did one right before I got there for people to show them like this is everything that we do, right? Because like I was in charge of 25 different on-site, off-site, and online programs, right? And that's just my department, and there were the other two departments, and what do they do within the learning group? So it would take a while to get into that. But even knowing that, just having like a 1.1 or 1.5, I can't remember exactly what the total budget was, but it's like that's of the overall. That's nothing. I can tell you about one of my uh, uh, um, not so favorite experiences. There was the CFO asking us to try to think of more revenue generating programs, which we already had 3 or 4 that were revenue generating out of the 25. But like I know from and I'm always reminded of it now because I teach this learning in museums stuff of like this one reading talking about like if you compared with the tickets, the concessions, all the auxiliary income, education is a small fraction for revenue for what you get for those things. And they're like they really shouldn't have that expectation that they're gonna get more revenue from an increase in registrations for programs. Like, so yeah, there and I don't know. There's a few ways that I was kind of disappointed with the leadership of that organization and how they were thinking about things. But I wasn't there all that long, so I left and ended up going down in Arizona and then back here.
Well, it's a great example. Before I forget, I wanted to ask you about the Ethogram application example.
Yeah.
Were
Mm-hmm.
students in multiple schools able to pool their data together?
I don't think that they were doing that. I think it was specific classrooms were doing that. I mean, I can't be sure because, like I said, I was there for the beginnings of those conversations and then the sort of the formation of what that was going to turn into. But I wasn't there when like the rubber met the road and we deployed it.
Oh, I might look it up. I'm curious to know. Just this is really just an aside. I worked on a project in
Yeah.
2010, 2011 down here in Tallahassee where we did something very similar with a local museum where we had 4th and 5th graders gathering data, animal observations, but the kids from different schools could then share their data with each other back in the classroom. So it
Yeah.
was a really fun experience.
Yeah. It would be a really wonderful thing to do. I'm looking at their website to see if I can find uh, that program. Virtual encounters, virtual camps, two of these videos. Yeah, they have the focus is on all the virtual stuff right now. Yeah, so it's hard, it's probably deep in there somewhere. But I should I'm pretty sure from when I last checked last year, like they were still doing that program. Um, yeah. So I mean that was a really interesting experience in terms of like of I mean, I I I I've been doing a lot of work in collaboration for a number of years. Like like I said, like I had this organization that facilitated collaboration among scientists and artists to create performances. So we had to figure out a way that we were doing that, right? The process of making collaboration work. And so that was a pretty interesting testing ground for seeing how that would work. These cross departmental things, but that's something that whenever wherever I've been necessarily, or the experiences that I've had when I taught, I try to make suggestions for like sort of certain process changes to facilitate that kind of stuff, more cross departmental stuff. Anyway, like I said, like when I got to the MSC Museum, the education and the exhibits team weren't having joint meetings, and that made no sense to me. I was like, hey, this is a small enough museum. Like, you guys should not be having, like, you always have to like catch up with each other later, right? So, and by that, and then those meetings were like super productive and really great because it's like, oh yeah, okay, and everything's moving at a much better pace because of it. And, so, um, yeah,
Well, that's an important point too about building those connections and the role of the museum tech person to be that intermediary. I think you mentioned
yeah,
this earlier. You may not do the programming, but you know how to talk to the programmers, right?
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the experience that I had at like the interaction design lab and things like that. It's like, yeah, I mean, uh, there there was a project that I worked on where I provided some of the content that was going in apps, but then I didn't like make them go into the apps. that's that's what the programmers were doing. Um, but yeah, and the same thing with that AR project. Like, you know, working with a programmer and like, okay, here's this content that can go in this area and that, and make it happen the best you know how. um, uh, and yeah, I mean, certainly um, uh, sir, but one of the bigger kind of things that or ideas that I think about with digital museums anyway is that like, and this is, I was talking to the director of the Arts Cultural Management Museum Studies program about it because she was saying, okay, what's the big idea of what you're trying to get across? And I was like, well, okay, well, and I had to think about it for a minute. I was like, well, everything is digital.
Mhm.
It's everywhere. You can't work in a museum without intersecting with digital in some particular way now. Like whether it be back end stuff or any, you know, your email or whatever, or, you know, working with Excel, or if it's going to be collections work, you know, like you're dealing with digitizing collections in some particular way, or you're photographing collections and you're organizing that data somehow, um, and usually in some sort of digital format. Um, you know, there's so much that's happening with the user-centered stuff. There's, you know, podcasts and social media and um, teleconferencing stuff, and you know, like it's everything, right
Max, that's
now.
like the hardest thing to get people to understand.
Yeah, yeah,
They're just
that
not there
it's
yet. You know, what do
yeah.
we do to get them there?
Yeah, and then people say, "Oh, I'm not, you know, I'm a luddite or whatever." It's like, no, you're not. You work with digital stuff every darn day. Like, so it's just a matter of thinking about it in a different way than necessarily like, oh, I can't. People think that if they can't, if they're only going to dip their toes into something, then they're not doing it. And like, I just think that you have to start somewhere. And because I don't know everything there is to know. But I know enough to know that these technologies have certain affordances and certain risks, right? And that when we move forward with these things, we want to think about all of that. um, you know, if just if you sign up for a free program, if you're, you know, people are getting on Clubhouse right now, it's like, okay, it's fine, you know, you can do that, but if you just know when you're signing up for that if it's free, then you're the product, right? Um, and are you comfortable with that, right? Like, I mean, I am comfortable with that to a degree to some things, but others I'm not, right? And people should think about that in terms of museums too, like how much we're asking our visitors to do, right? And um, you know, uh, um, museums like think about. There's been this big focus on visitors for so long. I mean, so visitors are the product rather than our content, right? Um, and so I just think like uh, it helps you to think about uh, digital helps you to think about other things. It helps you to think about privacy broadly. It helps you to think about intellectual property. It helps you to think about collaboration. It helps you to think about marketing. It helps you to think about public relations. Um, so it's everywhere, right? And yeah, more people just need to accept the fact that they're there, but they may not necessarily be like the most active in one way or another. And that's actually what I'm doing in the workshop for MuseWeb is talking about digital presence, getting people to kind of map out where they are digitally, like, and once you get that picture of like what are they like, are they a visitor? Like on LinkedIn, I'm a visitor. I don't post things there. I don't really engage with other accounts. I just like look at the timeline sometimes, right? Twitter, I'm a resident. I post there. I share things. I get in conversations, right? And um, LinkedIn is more of a professional thing, so it's kind of down here because if you have there's this model that David O. White came up with called the visitor and resident model, where you have an X and Y. What's the term? Forget, but a field, right? And so on one end is visitor resident, one end is personal professional, and you put the things there just to see, because a lot of people don't really think about it that way, right? Think about like what am I actually doing online, and then Cartesian plane, yes, thank you, and then showing people the digital engagement framework that Jasper Visser and Jim Richardson created, because I've been using that to develop strategies a lot. I find it to be a really useful tool in some ways, and really useful in terms of like personal digital strategy. Like individuals can use it, as well as museums can use it, as well as festivals can use it, and like it's super scalable. But the source, yeah, there it is, digitalengagementframework.com. If you're going to use it, I will say this: they have the framework that you can use, and then they have two worksheets. One is a value creation model, and it's useless. Don't bother with it. And the other one is the phases of engagement worksheet, and that one is like essential to making it work. Yeah, so I'm gonna lead people through those experiences so that they like think more about where they are digitally, and then what they want to do, and then have a plan for doing it. So that's going to be that workshop.